Hello, I'm John T.Y. Smith, and you're watching Cuyahoga Baptist Church online worship service. Thanks for being with us in this unique way. This month is July Sabbath, a scaled-down time we're calling Reset. On Sunday mornings, we come together for one worship service at 10 o'clock, preceded by a light breakfast and fellowship at 9:30 in the fellowship hall. All other activities and discipling groups are on hold. We are asking God to renew our minds and help us to refocus on Him. Mark your calendars for the July 31st Back to School Bash, 4 to 6 p.m. at Cuyahoga. All elementary school-age children and parents are invited to come join in the fun and receive free school supplies. Sunday, August 7th is Promotion Sunday at Cuyahoga. This marks the new year for all discipling groups, and we are really excited to kick it off. School-age children and students will advance to their age-graded classes, and there are some new classes for adults to choose from. If you're not yet involved in one of our great Sunday or weekday discipling groups, just contact someone in our church office to find out how you can get plugged in. Last week, we dropped a hint about something really exciting coming next month, and I've got a second clue for you, KZ3D. Yep, I said KZ3D. Even more info coming next week. If you'd like to support the ministry of Cuyahoga, you can do so online or by using our mailing address. In a few minutes, Pastor Steve is going to teach, continuing in the series Reset. Before that, let's sing and worship to Christ our Savior.
Your love sought me when I was low, a wanderer on a broken road. In shame, shackled my heart and down. I was lost in sin, but you brought me out. Your voice shattered the dead of night. With just one breath, every wrong's made right. Now my soul in victory, safe from harm, shouts, I'm free in my Savior's arms. Yes, I'm free in my Savior's arms. And oh, how great your love is, how deep your kindness, how sweet your grace. And oh, how strong your mercy through every valley you made a way. And you came down to a fallen earth deep your kindness, how sweet your grace.
Anyone who has ever read an article on leadership is probably familiar with the statement that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, we're this month at Kyoki looking at a reset. We are taking what we call a July Sabbath, and that is we have stopped doing many of the activities and the functions that we do throughout the course of a year for a month, for 5 weeks, and we're coming together for worship and praise and to open God's Word. And we're looking at different issues, and today we're going to be looking at costly mistakes that we frequently make. And we're going to base our look out of the first half of Matthew chapter 15. So let me invite you to take your Bible. If you don't have a Bible, pause this and go grab one. Use what you've got. I'm going to be reading out of the English Standard Version of Matthew 15, and we're going to read the first 20 verses. And we're reading a pretty large section because it's all tied together, and some pretty significant truth that we're going to come across that addresses these mistakes that we frequently make. So here we go. Matthew 15, starting in verse 1. Then Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat." He answered them, "And why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? For God commanded, 'Honor your father and your mother,' and whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. But you say, if anyone tells his father or his mother, 'What you would have gained from me is given to God,' he need not honor his father. So for the sake of your tradition, you have made void the word of God. You hypocrites! Well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men.' And he called the people to him and said to them, 'Hear and understand, it is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth. This defiles a person.' Then the disciples came and said to him, 'Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying?' He answered, 'Every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be rooted up. Let them alone. They are blind guides. And if the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit.' But Peter said to him, 'Explain the parable to us.' And he said, 'Are you also still without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is expelled? But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile anyone." Our Father, we come before you in this time, and we ask that you will open our eyes that we'll see, open our ears that we'll hear from you, open our hearts that we will be changed and transformed by you. In Jesus' name we ask, amen. It is one of the pivotal moments in the ministry of Jesus, this confrontation. It is one of the last times of public teaching that Jesus will make as he heads to Jerusalem and goes to the cross. Now, he'll have times of teaching with his disciples, but this is one of the last times that he will teach the public, and one of the final confrontations that he has with the religious leaders. I want us to look at 4 mistakes that people make. I've made them. My guess is you've made them. But I just thought for Christians, and particularly for our Kaioki family, what do we want to be aware of and sensitive to in our lives during this time of reset? So here we go. Let me give you the first mistake, and that is we pigeonhole God. We pigeonhole God. Now, I don't know if you use this terminology and language like pigeonhole. You may not know what to pigeonhole something means. My dad was a master level 10 authorized professor of pigeonholeology. He lived pigeonhole. He taught pigeonhole to his sons and to anybody that would listen. He loved to teach and tell us, son, you need to pigeonhole. You need to take a $5 bill and you need to put it somewhere so that on a rainy day or when you gotta have money, you can get to it. Now, understand that in my dad's day, there were no such thing as debit cards, and although debit cards came along before he passed away, he never used an ATM, never used a debit card his entire life. It was either cash or check, and that's how you bought things. And I guess check, if your wife allowed you to have that one measly old wrinkly check that would get torn up in your wallet. But he would tell us to pigeonhole some money so that if you ever were in need, you always had that money that you had tucked away. Now, Webster defines pigeonhole, and it does define, it's a term that makes the dictionary as a verb in the way we're using it and the way my dad used it, and it means to lay aside or to assign to an often restrictive category. To lay aside or to assign to an often restrictive category. That's what we do with God. We often pigeonhole Him. We assign Him a part of our lives, a part of our week that we give to Him. And we say, okay, God, here are the parameters in which you can affect me in the way you can affect my week, in the way, I'll give you Sunday morning, I'll watch an online service, but that's about the extent of it. And in doing so, we just lay aside His authority and the lordship that Christ claims on all that is His. And maybe the reason we find it so easy to pigeonhole God is because the truth is, He is not the Lord of our lives. Now, let's bring this to this passage that we just read. Here's what's going on. Jesus has just come out of a very significant, very public few days of miracles. He has fed over 5,000 people. He has then walked on water to get to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. People have followed Him to the other side and have demanded that He continue to feed them. It is also there where He has healed the sick. And so that at some point in time, when Matthew says then, we're not exactly sure, is that a week? Is that a month? But at some point in time after these events, religious leaders from the temple, from Jerusalem, have traveled to Galilee. Evidently, maybe the synagogue leaders in Galilee got word to them, sent a message to the big boys in Jerusalem, but they've traveled up to Galilee, and they are going to stop this carpenter, this rebel rouser, this rabbi, Jesus of Nazareth, and they're going to put him in his place because they don't appreciate what he is doing with people, because he seems to not follow their traditions, right? And so what you have in verse 1 and 2 is you have this expectation of these religious leaders. Then Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat." Now, maybe they've just observed Jesus and his disciples eating a meal. Maybe that was one of the pretenses that got them to Galilee, because they were told that when he fed all these thousands of people, none of them washed their hands. But they've got expectations, and their expectation of Jesus is that he is less than their tradition. He is less than their tradition. And Jesus confronts that. Jesus confronts their pigeonholing of Jesus. They assume he is nothing special. Even though the crowds, the people have called out how he teaches with authority that their religious leaders don't, they look at him and they look down upon him. And in their mind, their traditions, their religious traditions, trump his authority. They pigeonhole him. They pigeonhole him. And he responds to them in verse 3. "Why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition?" He calls them out. Why are you placing your traditions, which lead to your actions, above the Word of God? God has given us the law. These traditions that the religious leaders followed were not scriptural. They were generally oral traditions that had passed down from generation to generation of religious teacher. And they have taken on among the years, as they've been taught, a certain authority that, as they are kind of like a commentary on Scripture, and the greater authority has been given to the commentary, i.e. the tradition, as opposed to the Word of God. And so Jesus, in verse 7 through 9, diagnoses the problem. He calls them hypocrites, and he quotes Isaiah 29, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men." He's saying, you don't worship God. You worship the way you worship God, but the way you worship God is not genuine. It's not real. You dishonor the Lord in doing this. It is a religious phonyism, if you would, that these men are going through. It is the opposite of religion that James calls, in James chapter 1, pure and undefiled. John Stott, in his book, The Contemporary Christian, writes this: "No book, not even by Marx and his followers," and if we could just insert, or Sam Harris, or Richard Dawkins, or Christopher Hitchens, and on it goes, it doesn't matter who they are, no book is more scathing of empty religion than the Bible. The prophets of the 8th and 7th centuries BC were outspoken in their denunciation of the formalism and hypocrisy of Israelite worship. Jesus then applied their critique to the Pharisees of his day. And this indictment of religion by the Old Testament prophets and by Jesus is uncomfortably applicable to us and our churches today. Too much of our worship is ritual without reality, form without power, fun without fear, religion without God. Now listen, let me ask you a question. How much of what you do for God is genuine? How much time do you spend before Him just opening up your heart? How much of your time do you spend pouring into your heart, soul, and mind His Word? Do you genuinely submit yourself to Scripture? Do you look to God first before you lash out or you answer back? Does His Word inform the decisions that you make personally, professionally, with your family? When's the last time you've been convicted by sin? Genuinely convicted by sin to the degree that it has changed the way you live your life, the way you think, and therefore it affects the way you act and speak. If you can't remember the last time, I want to suggest to you that perhaps you have pigeonholed God into a certain category, a certain part of your life. Now, listen, the disciples, see life even this late in their time with Jesus. I mean, they have spent over 2.5 years with Jesus, and they have somewhat pigeonholed God, Jesus, and the religious leaders. And they continue to place the teaching of the traditions that the religious leaders purport to stand for at some type of equal basis with Christ. And here's why I say this. It's ironic of the disciples thinking when they ask and they make a statement to Jesus in verse 12, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying? Well, what was the saying? Well, it's what he just said in verse 10 and 11. Hear and understand, it's not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth that defiles a person. The disciples hear that and they go, and they ask him. They were offended by that. And as one commentator brings out, that the English word offended doesn't capture the strength of what the disciples' question is. It's the Greek word that's translated offended, scandalizo, or scandal. They were scandalized by that statement. Lord, do you understand that? Don't you know that? Now here's what puts that into context. They're looking at Jesus and they're saying, somewhat, how dare you say that? You've greatly offended the Pharisees. Coming right off the heels of Jesus feeding the 5,000, walking on the water, to the degree that when he joins them in the boat on the Sea of Galilee after he's walked out to them, we are told by Matthew, who was an eyewitness, who was there, that they worshiped him. They worshiped him. Only God was to be worshiped. And you see in that moment, the disciples equating Jesus with God. They worshiped him. But in their practice and in their routine of pigeonholing their life into different categories, we see that Jesus is not all-consuming. He wasn't to the disciples, and sadly, far too often, he's not to us. So I want to encourage you. Do you pigeonhole God? Do you pigeonhole God? Here's the second mistake we make, and that is we have a preoccupation with secondary issues. We have a preoccupation with secondary issues. The disciples, in their question in verse 12, represents a very modern day reaction. And that is, they were offended. You scandalized. How dare you scandalize people? If this incident had happened in 2022, they would have gone to Twitter and they would have tweeted out, or they would have posted something on Facebook of the offense that was brought upon them. And then the whole issue of whether or not Jesus and his disciples wash their hands before they eat. The issue here, by the way, is not whether or not their hands are literally clean before they put food in their mouth. What the tradition of washing before you ate represented, it was a picture of a man's cleanliness before God. And therefore, to show that you were clean before God, there was this long, elaborate ritual based on these traditions. It's not scriptural, of washing and purifying one's hands before they came to the table. That's the concern, right? But what Jesus calls them out on in verse 11, it's not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth. This defiles a person. Again, later on, in verse 17, he says, do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is expelled? But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. There is a preoccupation both with the religious leaders and with the disciples, the 12, with secondary issues. They're caught up in washing of the hands, and they're caught up in whether or not the Pharisees are offended, took offense at Jesus' words. I can just imagine, today, modern explanations for sin and for problems that separate us and cause issues for us. We can name climate change, right? Or transphobia, or crony capitalism, or lack of education, or too much education, or poverty, or abortion rights, or political alignment, Republican or Democrat. These are all excuses. These are all modern day causes for the problem of man, the issues that we face. But really what these causes do is they cover up the real problem, which Jesus identifies as sin. As sin. It's not what goes into your mouth that is sinful. It's what comes out, because what comes out is a reflection of your heart. It's a reflection of your heart. Someone has said that the world wants to prioritize the pollution of the environment. And we are responsible to God to care for His creation, the environment. But that the real problem is not the pollution of the ozone layer. The real problem is the pollution of the heart. I think that's right. Jesus is affirming the validity of that statement. So what is your preoccupation? What cause do you live for? It might be something. It might be your job. It might be your personal life. It could be any variety of things. What do you worry about? What do you spend your money on? What do you spend your time doing? And you might respond to me saying, Steve, those are all good things. And I would say, yeah, those are good things. But they're not the most important thing. Those are not the best things. It's not the issue. And we tend to devote our time and our money and our efforts and our thoughts to secondary issues instead of the most important issue. We get excited about the wrong things. We get saddened about the wrong things. You know, you may be watching, well, obviously you are watching, and perhaps one of the reasons you decided to devote your time to watching this online service is because you're depressed or you're sad. Well, if you want to filter this about what we're talking about with being preoccupied with secondary things, let me ask you, why are you sad? Are you sad? Are you discouraged about the right things, the proper things? You know, one of the differences between Peter and Judas Iscariot when Jesus was arrested, Judas Iscariot betrayed Jesus and returned the money. Peter denied Jesus and went out and bitterly wept. Judas Iscariot was saddened because he had messed up. Peter was saddened because he had sinned against the Lord. There's a difference. There's a difference. David in Psalm 51 writes about the fact that the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, you will not despise. And that's true. And you may have a broken heart. And I want to tell you, if you are, you came to the right place. But again, I ask, what's your heart been broken by? Have you identified the cause of your brokenness? Because brokenness over anything is not necessarily the right thing. David writes these words, it's a prayer to the Lord because his heart is broken and contrite because of his sin. He has sinned against the Lord. He is preoccupied not with the secondary issue. He is preoccupied that he has brought this malignancy not just upon himself, but upon God, upon the name of God. And he is broken by it. Okay. We don't want to pigeonhole God. We don't want to be preoccupied with secondary issues. Third, don't make the mistake of failing to understand your heart. Don't fail to understand your heart. Jeremiah 17:9 says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it?" Back in this encounter between Jesus and the religious leaders in Matthew 15, Jesus describes in verse 18, what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. Paul later writes, the wages of sin is death. Sin is deadly. If I can quote John Stott one more time, Stott, writing about sin, says that sin's essence is self-centeredness. Its origin is the human heart, and its consequence is defilement before God. And what he's zeroing in on is the reality that the problem that we all face is not a lack of religion. It's not a lack of church attendance. It's not a lack of even reading the Bible. Our problem is sin. And you just can't be religious enough, or you can't be educated enough, or you can't be moral enough to cleanse the sin from your soul. One of one of the great pictures of what we're talking about in modern times is the movie As Good as It Gets. It stars Jack Nicholson as Marvin Udall, who is, ironically, he's a best-selling romance novel author, and but he treats people horribly. He insults everyone. He's extremely prejudiced against Jews, against homosexuals, pretty much against anybody that doesn't fit his narrative. And here's the ultimate irony in Marvin Udall's life. He washes his hands with a new bar of soap several times a day. He has in his home just the stack of unused, unwrapped, fresh bars of soap. And every time he goes to the sink, he unwraps a bar. He washes his hands extremely. These religious leaders in Jesus' day would get it and would go, "Good job, Marv." And then when he's done with it, in that one cleansing, he throws the soap away. But inwardly, he is this dysfunctional, unhappy, evil, wicked, sinful man. And he fits the category, he fits the narrative of all humanity. If you've seen the movie, you've probably laughed and you can identify with what I'm talking about. But make no mistake, Marvin Udall is you and me. That's Jesus' point here. Jesus doesn't stand against tradition just to stand against tradition, right? What he calls these religious leaders out on is the way they have elevated what were cherished practices, but they've placed them outside and above Scripture. And whenever tradition, it might be a Christmas tradition, it might be a weekly Sunday tradition, it might be a tradition of the church, it might be a personal tradition. But whenever it becomes equal to, in practice and authority, to God's Word, then we're guilty of the exact same thing that Jesus called the Pharisees out on. Our worship is empty because we've placed ourselves equal to and even above the Lord. So Jesus reminds us, it's not the food that you put into your stomach that causes the problem. It's the sin that comes out of our hearts. The problem is we're lost. We are sinners. The problem is what flows out of our wicked heart. Someone has written that the source of true defilement in men is the human heart. And the tragedy of men's having to sin reaches its demonic fulfillment in man's wanting to sin. There is no heart which this radical evil has failed to take root. Can I just read that one line again? The tragedy of men's having to sin reaches its demonic fulfillment in man's wanting to sin. We don't only sin because that's what we do naturally, but we lurch for the sin. We desire to sin. And that might hurt, and you might be thinking to yourself, Steve, can you get off the sin thing? Your issue is with the Lord, it's not with me. Jesus even gives us a list of examples of sins in verse 19. Out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. Man, aren't these just outdated, old-style sins. You could go to your local grocery store and look at the checkout line and pick up a National Enquirer or a People magazine, and you'd read about every one of these. Every one of these. Have you ever come to the point where you have stopped blaming others, stopped being preoccupied with secondary issues, and acknowledged that you have sinned against the holy God? That you've built your life on things that are temporary and will not last. Well, if that's the case, here's where we're going to land. The fourth mistake we make is we seek approval by merit instead of mercy. We seek approval by our own merit instead of God's mercy. Here's what this looks like. Merit says, "Teacher, why don't your disciples wash their hands before they eat?" Religion. Education. Where'd you go to school? What's your highest degree? What'd you major in? Career, cultural acceptance. Where do you work? How much do you make? What's in your IRA? Politics. Who'd you vote for? Red or blue? Teacher, why don't your disciples wash their hands before they eat? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's merit. Mercy points to the cross and says, they don't wash because they don't have to. They don't have to. I have washed them instead. I've done the washing. Jesus shows us that the point of the Old Testament law, the cause of cause-seeking hearts, the standard that overshadows all of humanity, is measured and determined by their relationship to Him. He is the point. He is the cause. He is the standard. He died on the cross, He was buried, and 3 days later He was resurrected from the grave. And He lives to make intercession for His children. He does the washing. He cleanses our evil, sinful hearts. The hearts that were once so wicked they separated us from God do not have to remain evil. Do not have to remain wicked, and do not have to remain sinful. Do we struggle? Yes. But Jesus has done something unbelievably gracious. He has removed the evil, wicked heart of stone and placed in it a living, breathing, cleansed new heart of flesh. By grace. By grace. He has washed us. He cleanses us. And He says, believe in me, and I will make you mine. And He will. And He does. And He invites you to Himself, even now. And the most important decision you will make today or any day in your life is not giving to this cause or who you're going to leave your money to or, what school your kids are going to attend. The most important decision you will ever make is to surrender your life and trust Jesus Christ as your Lord, as your Redeemer, your Savior, and that He will cleanse you. And all of the religious ritual or all the cultural tripe that you're counting on, you can just let fall away. Because it is Jesus, and it is Jesus only. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your Son, that we make these mistakes, but you don't leave us stranded in the mistake. You offer salvation. You offer life. You offer new heart. And God, I pray that every person that is watching this and hanging with us, that, Lord, they would ultimately not trust the fact that they've watched an online worship service, or that they've opened their Bibles, or that they love their kids. But, Lord, they would trust the fact that Jesus Christ has died on a cross to forgive them of their sin, forgive their sinful heart, and make them new creatures in Christ. We love you. God, hear us as we close out our service in song. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. And indeed, join us as we wrap up in praise of the Lord. God bless you. Look forward to having you and joining you next time.
Yeah. tending the wounds, for through your suffering I am free. Death is crushed to death, and life is mine to live. One through your selfless love. This the power of the cross. Son of God, slain for